Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann. Ow. I just bumped my finger. Anyway, I'm filming on my phone in a hotel room because I'm traveling for work, but I really wanted to talk about this book, The Story of the 100 Promises, because I just finished it a few days ago and I'm about to pass it off to a friend, and I don't want to pass it off without sharing about it a little bit because it was really incredible. All right, I need to organize myself a little bit. So, The Story of the 100 Promises by Neil Cochrane is it's a little hard to pin down. So, partly it is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. That's what it's billed as, is partly a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, which was one of the things that I really loved about it because a lot of the story, a lot of the chapters in this book are told in a fairy tale style, and it's beautiful writing. I mean, Neil nailed it. It sounds like, what somebody would say in the opening to a Disney movie, or what Galadriel says at the opening to Lord of the Rings, right? It's that just that fairy tale language, that way of speaking, of writing, and it's really beautiful. It really feels like a classic fairy tale, those pieces of the book. And so we get kind of these fairy tale pieces, and we're kind of in a fairy tale because we're in the retelling, but then there's also fairy tales within the fairy tales because this is set in a fantasy world. And one of the main characters is a mysterious enchanter who is part fairy. We don't get a lot of details about what fairies are, anything about their biology, things like that. But we know that the enchanter's mother was a fairy, and so the enchanter is very different from most of the people in this book, and are very long-lived. And I'm going to try to remember to use neopronouns em and er because those are the pronouns of the enchanter in this book, which brings me around to this is a beautifully trans queer retelling of Beauty and the Beast. So it's very, very loosely based on that fairy tale, very loosely based. I would say, which is great because there's a lot of problems with the original Beauty and the Beast that don't really fit with the modern world. But a lot of the original elements in the fairy tale are the same. So in this book, we have the enchanter, who I already mentioned. We also have our main character, Dara, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's Darragh, which in my head I would always just read as Dara, but Neil might have intended a different pronunciation, and I don't know Neil, but I'm using his first name. But anyway, yes. So we followed Dara, who is a trans man. And Dara is a sailor, which is really, really cool. So there's sailing ships in this book, river ships, ocean ships. Dara is a sailor. He's really worked his way up from the bottom because he ran away from home as a teenager because as a trans man, his father totally rejected him. And so we do get some of Dara's kind of pain and regret and anger about that situation with his family. But at the point when the story opens, he's quite a bit beyond that. I feel like, I forget if it's been 10 or 15 years, but he's been away from home for a long time. He's made his own way. He's progressed up the ranks as a sailor. He's really found his own true family with his captain, Sidra, and Sidra's partner. And so there's a lot of beauty there in terms of the found family and the journey of what Dara just accomplished on himself and for himself, and really fulfilling himself. An interesting thing about this book is that one of the main drivers of the plot is that Dara's transition, becoming a trans man, happened through magical means, and it was actually the enchanter who did it. So Dara had been just in this absolute crushingly desperate place as a young person on the cusp of puberty, and the enchanter showed up. And so very fairy tale right? So the enchanter gave Dara the solution to his problem. in the form of a magical thorn that Dara has to use throughout his life. And it started out like he had to use it frequently. He had to prick his finger and then flick a drop of blood either into fire or into water. And it was, at first, I forget if it was like 3 times a day, and then 3 times a week, and then every 3 weeks, and then every 3 months for the rest of his life, kind of thing. And so Dara has always been immensely grateful to this enchanter. A cool thing is that there are lots of other trans folks in the book in terms of side characters, but also just mentioned in the culture, because there are also doctors and alchemists who can assist people with transition as well. So it's not like Dara is the only person. And in fact, the culture in this book is actually quite advanced in that way, and we actually get some of the history of how the culture has evolved. But it's pretty typical for sailors to have tattoos that are visible that will share their gender identity and will share any gender preference that they might have for their lovers. And then in sort of parts of the world that the story is set in, it's common to introduce yourself immediately with your pronouns. You would say like your first name and then your pronouns and then your last name, I think was the order that's presented in this book. So, and that's just part of the culture. So like none of this is a big deal, which is part of why this book was so lovely. You're just reading about a culture where this is not a big deal, except that part of the history of the enchanter is that a lot of these things used to be a much bigger deal than they were, and the world used to be a lot less accepting than it is now in sort of the modern storyline of this book. So in the first half of the book, we're following Dara. Dara has been sailing for a while. He comes ashore on shore leave. His sister actually finds him and says, "Our father seems to be near death's door. Like this is your last chance to try to reconcile with him," basically. I think she comes and kind of opens with that. And then Dara is just like immediately thrust into this mess of emotion of, do I want to do that? Do I want to just go scream at him? Do I want to show myself off at like everything I've accomplished without any of his support? That sort of thing. And so this actually kicks off a journey where Dara is actually going to go find the enchanter to find a cure for his father, just so that he can have like this confrontation with his father. And he doesn't know what that is going to look like. He doesn't know what he's expecting from his father, what he wants from his father, if anything. So there's some of that like confusion and tension in the book. And Dara sets off on this journey to find the enchanter. And we get Dara's storyline, told very much from his point of view for really kind of the first half of the book, I would say, and then it switches. And then we kind of go back in time a little bit, and we actually get the story of the enchanter. We get the story of who the enchanter is, air childhood, air journey, just like this, multiple hundreds of years of what's been going on in this world. And really learning more about the world and its history, and learning about who this mysterious enchanter is. There's a really, really strong environmental storyline, which I really, really loved. There's a lot of mystery around where the enchanter's power comes from. That's not really ever explained, but there's a significant tie between air power and this magical, beautiful forest where they live. So that's really beautiful to see, is like that connection to nature. But then a lot of what drives the enchanter's development is tension with surrounding communities that use the forest extractively to extract resources, in particular lumber. And so that drives like these really big things in the enchanter's life. And so Dara does find the enchanter because, of course, right, it's a fairy tale retelling. It's a little bit of a romance. In sort of in a couple different ways. So of course Dara finds the enchanter. And where was I going with that? Oh yeah, and at the time that Dara finds the enchanter, the people in the surrounding communities have over-extracted from the forest, and the enchanter has just like utterly lost sort of their will to be interacting with the human world. There's been almost kind of a war that went on between the enchanter and the surrounding people, and the enchanter basically, like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, this is a mental health thing, because the enchanter is basically just like sunk so deep into depression. and it takes a long time, you know, months and months and months of Dara and another companion of the enchanter who figures quite strongly in the story as a side character, Frederick, who is the Beast in this retelling of Beauty and the Beast. There's just a really beautiful kind of relationship that develops between all three of them, and just a really beautiful sort of commentary on being there for people when they're going through depression and despair to the degree that the enchanter experiences in this book. So yeah, I'm trying to like give the outlines of the story without telling specifics of anything that happens, because there are some, you know, there's some plot points that you don't want to give away, but thematically, I hope I've kind of described it fairly well. The one thing that I find interesting is that this is supposed to be a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I actually didn't really know that going in, even though it says it like somewhere on the back of the book or something. Actually, maybe it doesn't say it on the back of the book. Anyway, I didn't know that going in until I started looking up a little bit more about the book. But when Dara gets to the Enchanter's Forest, like the Enchanter has this, it's called the Labyrinth, but it's essentially like a very protective like fortress in the middle of the forest, and it's surrounded by a rose hedge. And so while I was reading this, I was like, is this a Beauty and the, or not a Beauty and the Beast, is this a Sleeping Beauty retelling? So it almost could be both in a way, which is funny. Oh, it does say Beauty and the Beast on the back. It really could be Beauty and the Beast or Sleeping Beauty in some ways. But in any case, I absolutely loved this book. It is the debut novel of Neil Cochrane, who I believe is a trans man living in Portland. So this story, I mean, it felt beautifully authentic. It didn't have a lot of the like misogyny and Stockholm syndrome stuff of the original Beauty and the Beast, which I really liked. But it was so different from that it's like, I think it's almost better to just go into it not knowing that it's loosely based on that, and just appreciating the story for how novel and unique and creative that it is. So anyone who likes a blending of fantasy and fairy tale and found family and deep relationships, sailors, enchanters, this was a really, really lovely read, and I just said I'm going to pass it on to one particular friend, and then I'm also going to order a copy to send to another friend, because I'm just like, I know so many people who like need to read this book, or you know, needed to read it when they were 18, and will still be just as transformative in their mid-30s. So anyway, I will end there. But that was The Story of the 100 Promises by Neil Cochrane. Please go pick up this book. It was delightful. All right, I'll see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.